Hello, welcome back. I think people are still going to be trickling in because we did get a bit of a late start with the coffee break, but we're just going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to talk about in this session on smart grids, powering the e-mobility future. And we're going to be asking the question, how does the provision of transport and electricity need to change to make e-mobility a reality? Ladies and gentlemen, as the global population expands and cities expand, people everywhere want and expect increasing personal mobility. And at the same time, the price of fossil fuels continues to rise and their detrimental effects on the climate become ever more apparent. We need new options for maintaining mobility. That's something we've discussed at many past forums. And electrification, of course, is one promising route to low-carbon road transport. But major investment in vehicles and infrastructure will be required. Development of battery technology has lagged, and critics have raised concerns about whether local power grids can handle the demand fluctuation imposed by frequent recharging. All of these considerations make smart grids a key part of the mobility equation. They could enable intelligent scheduling of recharging and far more, say their proponents, making the electric vehicle part of a larger energy cycle that could even be used to even out fluctuations in demand and supply, including from renewable sources. Hopefully that word seamless is coming to mind. Vehicle-to-grid systems are seamlessness at its best if they become a reality. And just what it will take to make them one is the topic that we want to address here today. In the next hour, we want to examine it not only with our panelists, but also with you, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to be welcoming your questions during our session. If there's something that you want to add or a question you want to raise, please do just put your hand up and be sure to tell us who you are when you do that. As I say, in the next hour, we want to examine where we stand on the deployment of smart grids, integration with electric vehicles, and what innovations are in the pipeline. We want to look at the unfolding commercial prospects for fully electric vehicles and for hybrids. Interoperability of vehicles and battery systems and models for the development of public recharging infrastructure, also topics we want to talk about here today. And we've got an absolutely ideal selection of experts to do that. It's a pleasure to introduce them. I will now ask them to come up one by one as I tell you about them. And I'm going to ask them to sit down in alphabetical order. And we start out with Sérgio Monteiro. He is Secretary of State for Public Works, Transport and Communications in Portugal. He has served on Portugal's working group to review public-private partnerships. And he's held various management positions both in the banking and in the transport sectors. Welcome to you, Sérgio Monteiro. And next up, we have Pat O'Doherty. He is Chief Executive of Ireland's Electricity Supply Board, ESB. It owns the electricity distribution and transmission networks in Ireland, and it's currently supporting the development of advanced smart network systems, as well as charging infrastructure for electric cars all across Ireland. Welcome to you. Patrick Oliva is with us today. He's Corporate Vice President at Michelin in France. He's been with the company since 1982, held a whole variety of senior management posts, including responsibility for strategic planning and sustainable development. Welcome. And Henri Poupard-Lafarge is Executive Vice President of Alstom Group, Alstom Transport France, which is a leading supplier of high-speed rail and mobility solutions. Prior to Alstom, he served as at the French Ministry of Economy and Finance and at the World Bank. Glad that you can be with us. And with us as well, Mitsuhiko Yamashita. He is Executive Vice President and member of the Board of Directors at Nissan Motor in Japan. He started at Nissan in 1979, and he's held leading positions both in Japan and in North America, including as Senior Vice President in charge of environmental and safety engineering, as well as technology planning. So very glad that you can be with us today. And I'd like to start out by asking each of our panelists to talk a bit about where things stand in terms of smart grids, integration with electric vehicles, and promising innovations. And then, as I say, I'd like to open up for your questions from the audience as well as my own. So let us begin now with Monsieur Poupin-Lafarge. You have led both Alstom Grid and Alstom Transport. What is your perception at this point of the level of maturity of smart grid and e-mobility technologies?
Thank you. Good morning. When I was at Alstom Grid, we were talking about electrical vehicle. And when we were talking about electrical vehicle, this was something for the future. But when I arrived at Alstom Transport, I realized that actually electrical vehicle is something of the present. Because indeed, all of you have already taken a number of times an electrical vehicles. I'm talking about trains. And yes, 80% of the rail traffic, the rail passenger traffic in Europe is electrified. And it serves its purpose, because if rail transportation is responsible for 10% of the global traffic, it only represents 1% of CO2 emission. And more than that, I would say that today, rail transportation is facing a number of challenges that will be faced by electrical cars tomorrow. There are some differences, because in cars you need to transport the energy, so you have the problem of the charging, you have the problem of the battery, whereas most of the trains are supplied, the power supplied through catenaries. But still, you have the issue of the efficiency of the trains, such as you have the issue of the electrical cars. You have the issue of the braking systems and how these trains can transform themselves from being consumers of energy to producers of energies. You have the issue of microgrids. Think about it. A metro in a city is a microgrid. This microgrid grid has to balance itself internally. Sometimes, again, trains are consuming energy. Sometimes trains are producing energy when they brake. And now even with what we are developing, which is a reversible substation, this microgrid can be a producer for the entire district. I was also, just another example, always referring, and this is something which is classical in smart grid, about the DC network. How can we make a DC network in a city to supply high density of electricity in particular points of the city? But as you may know, most of the cities have already a DC network. Again, a metro is usually powered by a DC network. So all the problems of DC networks are, I would say, already challenged by the transport. So to conclude, I would say that stations, transport stations, would be key in this game. It will be key because this is the key place for intermodality between trains and cars, and particularly electrical vehicles. It will be key because this is a place where you can exchange power from the microgrids, which is coming from the transport network. Imagine, for example, that a very high-speed train, when braking, produces 3 megawatts of power, when a station itself will only consume 300 kilovolts, so the rest can be used for electrical vehicles, for example. So it will be also key as a network of the electrical supply. So I think that to answer to the question, yes, it has been interesting to see that actually a lot of debates that we have in the energy sector are already faced in the transport sector through rail transportation.
So as I understand you, you're telling us that there are analogies and also existing structures that we can work with to bring this technology forward. I'd like to get Pat O'Doherty's take on what the critical success factors are for an EV program in view of the fact that Ireland is, of course, playing a leading role in the rollout of smart electric vehicle infrastructure.
Thank you, Chairman. What I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in Ireland, and then I'll address the critical success factors, as you asked, based on the Irish experience. Our government has set very challenging targets for CO2 reduction for the electricity industry, 40% of electricity generated from renewable sources by 2020. And on a small island system like the Irish system, that's very, very challenging. And that predominantly will come from onshore wind. In transport, the government has set a target of 10% of vehicles by 2020 to be electric vehicles, and 10% reduction in CO2 by 2020. ESB, the electricity supply company in Ireland, it's a state-owned vertically integrated utility. We've invested significantly in smart grids over the last 15 or so years. We're ranked third by an international survey by IBM, third in the world. And we launched an electric vehicle pilot last year. And the target of this is to build an infrastructure to support 40 to 50,000 electric vehicles in the period between now and 2015, and to roll out the critical charging and information technology and the billing infrastructure by the end of this year. Ireland has a number of advantages in this, in that we're a small country. So giving battery technology the pace of where battery technology is at the moment, we can do a lot. You can travel a long distance in Ireland based on current charging technology. And our vision in Ireland is that the combination of sustainable electricity through decarbonisation of electricity and electric vehicles implies sustainable transport. And as we would see it, the critical success factors are, I suppose, number one is stakeholder. This is a new industry, bringing together the motor industry and the electricity industry, and we don't have a tradition of working together, the motor industry and the electricity industry. And there's lots of stakeholders, so there's government, there's local authorities, there's the various players that make up the whole value chain, and a new value chain and new business models are being created. So bringing together all of the stakeholders is very, very critical. Taking a long-term view is very, very important, because the costs are short-term and the benefits are long-term. And the other thing about the benefits is that the benefits accrue to different stakeholders in different ways. So the value proposition can be created along the value chain so that the costs in the short term and the benefits in the long term all fit together in the context of what various stakeholders and players bring to the table. Standards is another area that is very, very critical based on our experience. We've spent a lot of time on international working groups along with other utilities and with the motor industry. So openness and interoperability, and of course an international component. If transportation is to be electrified, I should be able to drive my electric vehicle from Dublin in the future down through Britain and charge it, down through France and into the south of Spain. So interoperability, openness is a very, very critical success factor. Incentives is another one, because in the short term electric vehicles are expensive. So some type of incentives are important. And for example, in Ireland, the government gives a grant. It gives a grant for the purchase of electric vehicles. It gives accelerated capital allowances for fleet purchase of electric vehicles. And the electricity supply company, my company, are providing free electricity at public charging posts, again, to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles. And of course, the charging infrastructure is a critical success factor also. Getting the charging infrastructure right is really, really important. And above all, putting the end user, the driver, at the centre of everything we do.
Thank you very much. Lots of keywords there to pick up as we move along with our discussion, including that very important issue of stakeholders and how we divide up responsibility and also profits. Let's stay, though, right now with the question of innovation, pipeline, and feasibility. And I'd like to go to you, Mr. Yamashita, to hear about where Nissan thinks that we stand in terms of vehicle-to-grid systems, where you see lots of potential and where you see the bugs. And I see a slide of the Leaf right here. So perhaps tell us as well whether you think you need to change the name of that car, like we heard in the first panel this morning.
I prepared some material for you better to see. The Nissan Leaf is launched at the end of 2010, the December. And this is first the mass production battery EV, 100%. And in this kind of the size of the vehicle. You may have a smaller vehicle before, but this is almost the so-called C segment full-size vehicle with 5 adults the capacity of the seating. And this vehicle, as you know, like, or maybe they discussed before, driving range is one of the concerns. But this is a 100-mile driving range under the US the driving mode. And if we have the Japan driving mode, it's at 200 kilometers. But actually, when you put the air conditioning on, or rainy day, cold weather, you cannot drive that distance. That's kind of, you said back, but actually we have to overcome. And actually the vehicle carries a 24 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery. And this is kind of the huge capacity of the battery. And we already sold more than 27,000 vehicles worldwide as of the beginning of April, last month. And actually, the 13,000 in Japan, 11,000 in the US, and the 3,000. We just started the sales in Europe, but we sold the 3,000. And also, this vehicle, by the way, how many people drove this car before? Oh, thank you very much. Car is quite different from the conventional, the gasoline or diesel engines. It's very quiet, very smooth. In the last session, the Japan's railroad company, the president said like Shinkansen, but these cars, I got the appraisal from like a journalist, this is like a Shinkansen because of the electricity driven the vehicle. And we got a lot of the award, including European Car of the Year or International Car of the Year in New York, or the double the award from Japan's Car of the Year. So this is really kind of evaluated by real, like the car journalist. But actually, we have a lot of the items to overcome from now on. And this car has a lot of other features, but this illustrates like the how cars can play a role in the smart community. And this car, by the way, is 24 hours connected the global data center, so-called. It's a Nissan's global the data center control the IT system. And we can monitor the status of battery every time. So if our customer has some kind of problem with battery, we can detect very early. And they say something, or maybe sometime we can replace. But this never happened before, but actually we can do this kind of things. Also, we can monitor all kind of healthy condition of the cars, 24 hours. This is one of the examples how the vehicle is connected in the network. This is one of the examples, but in the near future, or maybe we already started, and the vehicle connection in many, many different aspects of the grid network. So this is one of the features. But most like, the tangible or the compact example of this so-called lift home. We can connect this car to your home system, so-called like a power control system at home, and charge, discharge, both way. And they're also utilizing like the photovoltaic, like the system of the house. And then in the daytime, and when you can charge, maybe, or maybe evening time, you can discharge whatever, and can be utilized together with as a house, the system. Especially in the earthquake time frame in Japan last year, it's a disaster. But one of our employees used this vehicle as a power source when the plant blackout, the electricity shut down, and they utilize this vehicle as a source of like a television, refrigerator, or like the lighting, whatever. So anyway, this is just example, but we can utilize vehicle, not just a vehicle, like more, the power source. So a lot of the opportunities, but I'll stop here and then maybe continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lots of big visions there. You're all very bullish, of course. That was to be expected. But the fact is, this is going to be a long-term proposition, meaning we're going to need to see long-term continuous funding. Sergio Monteiro, Many governments have been trying to maintain support for smart grid technology and electric mobility despite very tough austerity budgets, yours among them. But how difficult is that going to be for you to do going forward, facing those fiscal pressures?
Thank you. Good morning, Melinda. Good morning to my fellow panelists. Good morning to you all. Before going straight into Melinda's questions, just like to give you a perspective on what we have right now in Portugal regarding e-mobility, namely the electric vehicle, the infrastructure that we have, which is pretty much infrastructure on the physical side and on the IT side, the seamless offer that we provide to our citizens. We have an IT platform that was developed mainly by Portuguese IT companies that provide the ranges of services that Nissan was mentioning. It's possible under the platform to do an yield management of cost and revenue regarding the charging and the decharging of a vehicle, the energy produced and used. So the V2H and V2G, it's possible under the IT platform that we have. And in terms of physical infrastructure, we have more than 1,300 charging points. We have a pilot program that covers more than 25 cities. So it's an interesting proposal in terms of infrastructure. We also start an incentive program of a reduction of 5,000 euros. The average cost of a vehicle such as the one that is shown and many others is around 35,000 euros in Portugal. And we have a reduction of 5,000 euros subsidized by the state. Even though we have all of this, we only managed to sell 200 vehicles last year. 60 of those for public administration. So I would say 140 for public. And why is that? In my view, in the Portuguese government's view, it's a newly appointed government just 10 months ago, so we inherited this program. We think it has many benefits for the population, but it lacked three things. First, the involvement, real involvement from day one of the industry. It was a centralized form of thinking. It was like the field of dreams that in the morning session was mentioned. Well, you have the infrastructure, then services would come. That was not the case. And the further involvement of all relevant stakeholders, industry and others, was missing. So planning was not made properly. Second, it's a living proof that infrastructure can only do so much. You need to break a number of barriers. I would say cost is perhaps a barrier. If you compare the existing cost with the cost of an average car for the average citizen in Portugal, this is inexpensive. Even with a 5,000 euro reduction, even without any taxes, if that would be the case. We have budgetary constraints. We cannot afford to have a no-tax policy for EVs. But nevertheless, if that was the case, the cost would be a hurdle. Then there is the matter of range efficiency, the perception of range. We are getting there. But the perception that people have, at least in my country, is that we are not there. Even with 1.3 thousand charging points, we will have a problem. If there is a queue, if there is something happening, we will have a problem. And I fully agree with the Irish minister in the panel in the morning, saying that selling this as a green proposition as a marketing problem. We need to sell this as a cost proposition, as a green proposition, as a responsible proposition, but also we need to include a number of other services. Why are we focusing on the ownership of electric vehicles and we do not think of a car sharing service for electric vehicles? Why we do not deepen the discussion regarding this car sharing? But as a government, we cannot lose a long-term perspective. Even though there are budgetary constraints that tactically oblige us to give a step back and to reduce some of the incentives, we want the EV to deepen, and we want to use the platform, the IT platform that we have created to really have a seamless transport system in Portugal. Meaning that intermodality is the only way that we can deepen the penetration of electric vehicles. The panel has started discussion by saying train, very important, and car, very important. But also the bus. The bus is extremely important. In the major Portuguese cities, natural gas is the way, is the fuel that buses use. But there is an electric bus proposition in Portugal that is currently being used and sold in Germany. Our IT platform is being sold and developed in Norway. So we have the capacity, we have the means, we have the innovation. We lack planning, and we are trying now to do our best to get all stakeholders on board. I will end my initial statement by saying, sorry for the representative of Nissan for me to say this, but the fact that Nissan has committed to a certain investment in Portugal for lithium batteries and has stepped out of that commitment, or at least postponed it for many, many years to come, does not help the Portuguese citizens and the region as a whole to perceive that the industry is betting clearly on an EV proposal, long-term EV proposal. These short-term tactics, I fully understand. We have our own budgetary problems. I'm sure that Nissan has thoroughly thought about continuing or leaving the investment. I'm just saying that we should also consider long-term perspectives when committing to those investments. Otherwise, we will jeopardize what was a huge effort from the Portuguese government in putting forward this infrastructure and try to get all stakeholders on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will pass it right on to Nissan and also ask for a word from our two other industry representatives on the panel about what it's going to take to get industry fully on board here. And I'm wondering, when you address that, tell me, is there somewhat of a chicken and egg problem here as well? If industry is concerned about subsidy vulnerability, could that be one reason they're holding back? And I'm thinking, of course, of the solar power industry in that regard. But let's give the first word to you, Mr. Yamashita.
Thank you very much.
It's on.
Okay. Subsidy is really important. We cannot live without the government support or like some kind of public support. So I really appreciate like the very kind of aggressive support from the government, especially the Portugal or like UK or maybe France. This is really necessary.
And are you worried about how stable that is?
Yeah, yes. But this is my personal opinion, but anyway,
well, that's
I cannot expect this kind of a subsidy forever, And you may have some kind of time frame, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, but probably 5 to 10 years, we have to prepare something, like a cost reduction, more values, without the subsidy, I think we have to go. That's our vision. But still, it's a little difficulty. This is like always a challenge of the technology we are always facing. And let me get you some kind of example, like airbag system. I may need some opinion from Mr. Oliver about the airbag system, and or maybe other like the car component. When we started the certain new technology, let's say price is just 100. It usually takes almost 10 years to reduce less than half. 10 years. This is a really average. So airbag, the starting time, we have 2 airbags, driver, passenger. Now we have 6, 7 airbags in the car. But as a matter of fact, cost is almost same now. So we reduce the airbag, the system costs quite a lot. This took almost the 10 years or more. That's a fact. But anyway, we can do the same thing for the EV. With like a very kind of a competitive like circumstances, a lot of the volume production, many factors really necessary, but we can reduce. But takes maybe 5 to 10 years, I don't know. 10 years are a kind of average, but even with a lot of the new technologies, I'm not sure that we can do it in 10 years. But during this time frame, we have to achieve this kind of goal. But during that time frame, I like to expect some kind of support from the government. And this is like not competition, but it's like almost racing, which comes first.
One brief word, if you would, please, on this question about whether it's a hindrance to larger uptake by customers that it is marketed, the Leaf, as a green vehicle.
Customer is really kind of realistic, so they do not dream, car is very good, but actually, like that always they can consider they are going to consider like cost versus values. This is always happen. So, as many people raise a hand, people is very interested in the electric car, but when they come to the dealers, they look at all details, and the most significant factor that they consider is the price and the range, price and range. And finally, some of the customer purchase a car, they are very satisfied. Our statistics said like more than 85, 90% of the customer very satisfied with the car. But before that one, some customer quit. So we may have potential customers. How we can get those customers more and more, then we can increase the number of the sales here.
Mr. Bouvard-Lafarge, Mr. Oliva, I'd like to hear from you about what you think might be holding industry back and what it's going to take to get real commercial viability. Am I losing my microphone? A bit. Okay, it's back. Go on.
On the industry, and I will go back to what has been said by Pat O'Doherty in Ireland, and what you have said in terms of analogy and what is faced today by electrical vehicles and electrical cars, and the difficulty of standardization, the difficulty of interoperability, is exactly the exact challenges that we face in rail transportation. And today, in a train, you have 4 types of power modules to be able to cope with all kinds of different systems of power supplies. So, as far as we are concerned, all what is holding back the industry is precisely these key success factors. And up until we are not able to create a global transportation system in Europe, and on top of the analogy, as you said, it's as it has been said by the Secretary of State of Portugal, it's not only analogy, it's that train has to be a part of mobility. And if you think that you are going to use electrical vehicles the same way you are using your car today, I think you are wrong. We have to look at the complete system. So it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. We need to have a complete mobility system, a European level, standardized, with, I would say, clear regulatory environment, because we need to have the mobility system and the power system together. This is this frame and as you say, as been said, the subsidies. We, again, in rail transportation, we have lived for years and years in a world which is subsidized. So we are used to this kind of fluctuation, so we know how to live with that. But still, a certain continuity is necessary. So I would say a global vision of the system and a continuity.
So Patrick Oliva, that sounds like we need not only new business models on the part of industry, but a new approach also for customers and consumers going forward. Who are going to be most likely the early adopters here, and what's the approach to them?
Let me, thank you very much, Melina. Let me maybe go back to some of the comments which have been made so far about the key success factors. What is very refreshing in this panel is that despite the difficulties, we keep bullish on the future of electric vehicles. And there are reasons for that. I started my career in the battery business. And really I think that batteries are central to the success of electric vehicles. Now let's face it. When we look at an electric vehicle, the battery will probably remain a relatively expensive and sensitive object. But despite the batteries, all other things are not that expensive. So first of all, I would like to say that we should not keep the idea that an electric vehicle tomorrow should necessarily be very expensive. Because despite the battery will remain somehow expensive. But we can reasonably expect, based on the progress that we know is feasible, we can reasonably expect that the cost of the battery might probably go down to something like 2,000 euros for each 100 kilometers of autonomy. Okay? 2,000 for 100, 4,000 for 200, and so on. And in addition to that, making an electric vehicle is not that difficult if we manage to get the volumes that we're used to with the traditional vehicles. So I think that there are reasonably good reasons to think that the situation is going to change this way. Now, a battery is going to be charged. And a battery is a very sensitive animal. Okay? It loves being charged slowly, which is not the expectation of customers. But if you charge it fast, you can do it. But its cycle span is going to be damaged. So it's a relatively expensive object which has to be treated carefully. But what is good is that we have plenty of experiences everywhere with battery swap, with the grids which are coming, and so forth. So this diversity of experiments is going to lead to what I think is going to be a very significant increase in electric vehicles in the coming decade. Not this one. I think that this decade that we are in will continue being a time for experiments, very valuable experiments. But the real time for the massive deployment will be the next one. So let's be smart to continue building. Now, the other thing I would like to say is that, coming back to our smart grid system, I think that there is one interesting experiment being conducted in China. China has clearly expressed its long-term vision about electrifying the country. And what is interesting is that they have very successfully passed the first step, which is electrifying two-wheelers, bikes, scooters, and this has been a huge success, and they have gained tremendous experience. They have set up now two priorities. One is electrifying cities, primarily through buses and urban trucks. And here, there is a real benefit that can be pretty rapidly captured. And the second objective is to electrify the countryside. Two different systems. The cities, on one part, and that brings, some specific technologies, and then electrifying the countryside, dispersed area, decentralized, and in both examples, the grids are going to be very important. Once again, using same basic technologies, but applied somehow differently. But I keep thinking that, with these developments on the battery and the reduction in cost, with the multiplicity of charging systems, and once again, we need not to be monolithic in our approach. Okay? I think that because of my experience in batteries, we need to have slow charging, somehow fast charging for, some occasions, battery swaps, all these technologies are absolutely needed. Now we need to see how, based on the experience we're going to conduct in this coming decade, how we can go massive in the next one. At least that's my view.
Great, thank you very much. Several points there I'd like to pass on to Pat O'Doherty. We got a real statement there about time, at least 10 years. So again, the question of subsidy vulnerability risk. Can governments justify putting in that money? But also, clear words there about the sensitivity of batteries. And that makes me wonder, can we really expect them to fulfill all these big expectations that we have? Evening out intermittent fluctuations from renewables, feeding power back into the grid at the end of the day. Big claims being made for these very sensitive animals.
I think we should be big in our vision and moderate in our expectation. It will take time. Maybe just to talk a little bit about subsidy. Governments are obviously going to be very, very concerned about subsidy and an enduring nature of subsidy, because it's a direct transfer from public funds into most likely private entities. And I suppose if I can give an example of a business an industry that I'm quite familiar with, which is the wind industry. The wind industry has been living off subsidies since its inception, probably 20 years ago, and there's no end of subsidies in sight. And that is a real concern for governments who give these subsidies. But then, of course, it comes back to where is the benefit. If the benefit is in carbon abatement at a national level. How do you get the benefit and the cost to line up? There's some interesting models of battery ownership. For example, Renault appear to have made the decision that they're going to lease the battery and leave the technology risk take the technology risk on the battery away from the customer. So that allows a lower cost of acquisition up front. Renault then will lease the battery on a per kilometre basis, and then other car companies like Nissan then have a different model. So there are different models and different ways of, I suppose, connecting with customers in terms of how much a customer is actually going to pay for the upfront cost. But what I said earlier is there's a whole new model being built here, a whole new industry being built. If you look at the whole value chain, and particularly the grand vision as outlined by Nissan, where you'd have two-way interactivity and communication between the electricity grid and the vehicle and the home. And that is the ultimate aim and vision of smart grids. It's the integration from the generator, no matter where that generator is, either large central generator or distributed generation through photovoltaics on a rooftop or small wind turbines, right through a smart meter in a house, all the way to electricity appliances. So you have got controllability and matching of load with customer needs in an optimum way. And electric vehicles can play a critical part in that. And because of the storage capability of electric vehicles, and you can then move to pure green power then, where you might only charge an electric vehicle when the wind is blowing and maybe not charge it when the wind isn't blowing. So you've got all of this real-time interoperability. And that is very, very complex in technology terms, but complex also in ICT terms, in terms of the technology, the communications technology to make this happen. But if we don't have the vision for it and the leadership for it, it's not going to happen. And it is really, really important that we do look long-term. But if you take the business that I'm in, wind power generators can generate more electricity and make more profits if you've got something like storage in electric vehicles. So how do you get transfer of financial resources from one piece of the industry that benefits to another piece of the industry that is in an incubation period? And how do you get that overall, I suppose, distribution of the costs and the benefits is a key piece, and will be a key concern of government. While the chicken and egg around the infrastructure is exactly right. People will not buy electric vehicles if the infrastructure isn't in place. And we won't put the infrastructure in place if people don't buy electric vehicles. So the infrastructure has to come first. And how do you build the infrastructure under probably a regulated and a subsidy environment in the short term and move it to a competitive model in the long term is a key challenge also.
I see a couple of hands up in the audience. I just want to pass on one brief question to Sergio Montero before we take some of these audience contributions. When I hear the claims that are being made or the hopes for smart grid technology and electric vehicles, as I say, feeding back into the grid, maybe the batteries evening out those fluctuations, I begin to wonder, are we really talking about an answer here to transport sector needs and mobility, or are we talking about a power sector issue? Or is that just seamlessness? It's all linked up.
Yeah, I think we need to take a joint economic, transport, environmental, a growth vision. So it's not a power or transport or environment as a single till. It has multiple ways to look at it. And we need to perceive that all decisions that governments are making need to be agreed, explained, and incorporated on the correct manner, or positive manner, by people who are ultimately the beneficiaries of those decisions and the ones that we serve. Meaning that, for instance, in Portugal, and with the wind subsidies and the PPP payments, a number of discussions have arisen, especially because public servants have lost a quarter of its income in 2 years. So it's extremely difficult to make them realize that we need to increase subsidies for a certain industry because of a long-term vision when they have the difficulty of survive on the short term. And the role of politicians is to help, to discuss, to bring align values, align long-term perspectives and visions, not of a single industry. This cannot be perceived as a power influence or the power lobby trying to sell something to a government, or the transport lobby, or the train lobby, or the whatever lobby. It needs to be a joint approach to a certain long-term vision that have several steps until the end goal is achieved. So in summary, just to pass to the audience, I would say that different countries face different difficulties, hurdles in this discussion. But at the end of the day, again, I end by saying that the long-term vision, the long-term strategy needs to prevail. We are a country that cherishes very much the contractual stability. Means that we do not write contracts. We do not end unilaterally with contracts. The stability of the relationship between a governmental entity, a public body, and the private entrepreneur citizens is extremely relevant. But we have to take into account our citizens' difficulties, the perception that there are some sectors that are heavily subsidized in order to make them aware that the long-term vision, that the long-term values have its own value in itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in the back, I have a question. You have a microphone already. Do tell us who you are, please.
My name is Jeremy Highway, supporting electric and renewable mobility. When looking at the subject, it seems to be very new to most people. So most people don't know how powerful a beast is, or how, well, the nature of the beast. I saw in the diagram 6 kilowatts for bidirectional electricity on the Nissan. Is that 3 charging and 3 back into the grid, giving a range of 6 kilowatts, or is it 6 kilowatts in each direction? That's just the first question, which is a doubling, for example, of a capacity. And also, does that constitute fast charging, or is that still considered slower charging? Because we mentioned, or it was mentioned, how batteries don't like being charged fast. In fact, when you drive an electric vehicle, the discharge is a lot higher. 15, 20, 25 kilowatts when you're accelerating. And the batteries should be treated intelligently, but they don't mind being discharged and charged at a very low range when they're 2/3 full, for example. So you have a potential for grid assistance of at least 6 kilowatts just parked in your garage. So that could help the home balance its load. But then you have the further question, is in fact a balanced load what is required by the grid at that point in time, live? Because the grid itself in the future will be experiencing fluctuations from wind and solar power. So you need the intelligence of all the systems together, knowing exactly what the partner would like. And just one further point, who is going to benefit financially from improving the efficiency of this system? If I hold a door open for somebody, I only expect a smile or thank you. I don't expect to be benefited. But in terms of using electric vehicles in a smart grid context, I would expect as a customer some financial advantage for considering how to do it intelligently.
Thank you very much. Lots of questions there. Let's start with Mr. Yamashita for these very specific questions, very good questions. What's long? What's fast?
Okay, thank you. A lot of questions there. Could you go back to my slide, 3rd page? 4th page, maybe.
No. You might still have the,
really?
yeah.
No, doesn't move.
Do we have a technician who can help us get back to the slides?
Okay, it doesn't matter.
Well, something's happening. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this said like, no, doesn't say anything. But actually, this charge is 6
There's a 6 kilowatt on there. There is. There's a 6 kilowatt. Yeah.
Here?
See?
Okay. This is a 6 kilowatt. Because of the Japan's, like some of the household restriction, the currency, the current, and also like voltage is like a certain kind of regulation. So that's why we designed the first one, this one. Two direction. No. I actually like charge, discharge, both 6 kilowatt. Okay. And the quick charge is I would say 50 kilowatt. It's like just charge direction, and the house system cannot receive this kind of high power the voltage. That's currently the restriction in Japan, and the Europe is a little different, a little higher volt. So you may have a little higher kind of wattage, but I don't know that exactly. That's the situation. And the other question is a lot of questions you said like.
There was that very interesting question about who benefits and who pays. This was something that Pat O'Doherty also raised in his first remarks, so maybe you want to make a comment on that.
I will. I agree with a lot of the observations you made, that ultimately it's the complete joining up end-to-end of the electricity system with through the electricity vehicle charging infrastructure and into the vehicles. It's that integration end-to-end seamlessly that will produce all of the benefits, ultimately. And the question then is, who will take what slice out of the benefits? Ultimately, customers of electricity supply companies should get rewarded for services that they provide to the grid. So where you provide a storage facility to allow more wind be generated on the system and be stored in your car battery, you should get rewarded for that in some way through your electricity supply company. Where you provide support to the grid, where you will sell your electricity from your battery back. Now the batteries won't like that, as we heard earlier from Monsieur Oliva, but you should get rewarded for that as well. And ultimately, the business models that are developed, and this is part of the pilot in Ireland, Eurelectric have proposed 4 business models, from a heavily regulated model at one end to a completely competitive model, a disaggregated value chain at the other. And ultimately, all models must be able to accommodate competition in electricity supply right out at the customer end, whether that's in your house for providing service or support to the grid, or whether it's in your vehicle as you're driving it or as you're charging it. Must provide for a truly competitive dynamic in terms of the interaction between as a driver and a householder as a consumer of electricity. And that's the only way that this is going to work ultimately. Otherwise, the benefit of all of this will be shared or will be taken on a disproportionate basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, please do. Yeah. And I think you wanted to jump in.
Elaborating on that, I'd like to make just maybe a bit of philosophical consideration. But I think that if we want e-mobility to develop, it will be a collaborative effort. Very much so. Going from individual ways of looking at mobility. And I like the connection which was made earlier with the possibility of using car sharing as privileged areas for the development of electric vehicles. And the experience in Paris, Autolib, in that respect, will be, I hope, very, very informative. But we're very much in shared systems here, integrated and shared. And we shouldn't think that the advent of e-mobility will happen at no cost. There will be a cost attached to it. But there will be a price tag, but attached also to a vision which is supposed to bring some benefits to society at large, like zero-emission cities, like better air quality, like preservation of the atmosphere, and so forth, which are long-term objectives, which will require the commitment of all stakeholders. But in this respect, I think that what is being proposed with smart grids is interesting in these 2 ways. Both the collaborative approach, and second, the decentralized approach. Mm-hmm. Because we can think of systems, we're getting out of these big machines, okay, that we are used to in all countries today. And now the time is coming when we have to do both with the centralized systems and the decentralized systems, where we have to tap in some ways the investment capacity of individuals, okay, and we need to find the right business models which are going to be rewarding for all the stakeholders. But this can be done. I think that the mindsets are ready. So I really look forward to the next few years precisely to make the next decade so impressively different from what we are living today.
I must say I'm struck when we talk about analogies to my own field of communications, because of course IT has allowed all communications users to become producers, and we have the same issues of collaboration, decentralization, and so on. I think you also had a thought about business models, Mr. Poupin-Lafarge.
Yes, I just wanted to outline the importance of the regulatory environment and the money flows. We are talking about the mobility, then there is the power supply network, then the IT network, and on top of all that, there is the money flow network and the business models. And just to give two examples, the picture you see on the slide from Nissan, in France, this does not work. Because in France, the regulatory environment is such that you are paid for your solar panel through feed-in tariff. So if you are somewhere on the countryside powering your electrical car with your photovoltaic panels, you get no subsidy. And therefore it does not work. So this is a simple aspect, which means that if you have a solar panel, you want to connect it to the grid to get the feed-in tariff. And it's an impediment to microgrid. Another example that we have in transport, I was talking about our metro systems being microgrids. We know technically, with reversible substations, how to power the cities through our metro system, or from the metro systems. The only problem is that the distribution networks in the cities does not know what to do with the power. First, we cannot predict, so he has not the IT systems able to predict that and to integrate that. And secondly, he cannot pay it, he does not know how to pay it. So again, all these issues will only be solved if we have the full system ready, the mobility, the supply, telecom, and the business model, which is kind of complex as we are sharing small amount of energy or small amount of mobility.
Thank you very much. I had a question here in the third row and also here in the second row. If we can get the microphones up here to the front.
Yes, thank you. Niels Christensen, Technical University of Denmark. It's rather a comment, and I think before we're getting into how to doing the steps along the way, I think it's very important that we recognize what was just said, that electric vehicles is probably something for the next decade. And therefore we have to think of what will be the business model in the next decade before we try to make the steps. And I would make some kind of warning of getting too much emphasis into the vehicle-to-grid aspect, because at the end of the day, the battery, we have to recognize that what people buy when they buy an individual vehicle, a car, electric vehicle or whatever, they first of all, they buy flexibility. So therefore, what they're buying is the possibility to go for a trip whenever they want to. And we have to recognize that in the next decade, the cost of the electricity will probably be not very important in the overall picture. So therefore, what they can save by selling electricity back into the grid when it's cheap, there's not that much to gain for them compared to the overall capital cost of the vehicle. So I would want to get too much into that kind of taking into account from the energy companies that there is some benefit to gain there for setting up the windmills or the wind energy. At the end of the day, the energy sector should think of a general equilibrium in the next decade, where the cost of setting up an extra windmill is more or less the same as the cost of buying the capacity of the electric vehicle. Thank you.
I have another comment in the second row. Let's just take that and bundle it, and then we'll come to Sergio Montero for a response. It's on, I think. Yeah.
This is Jim Motivale from National Public Radio in the States. We saw Mr. Yamashita's numbers of the Nissan Leaf deployment, where it was like 11,000 in the US, 12,000 in Japan, 3,000 in Europe. So the figures are rather stark 3 times the sales in Japan and the US as in Europe. And yet when we look at Europe, we see much higher gas prices than the United States, and in many ways better operability for electric vehicles than in the US because your cities are more compact, the driving distances aren't so great. So one would basically anticipate that EVs would do well in Europe. And yet, even if you look at some of the countries that have the heaviest subsidies, like Denmark, and we've heard pretty clearly the example of Portugal, where despite having 1,300 charging stations, they sold only 200 cars. So it does seem that the infrastructure is there in Portugal, but the sales aren't there. And I don't think I've heard yet from the panel why this is. And I would like to hear more about what's going on with deployment in Europe and why it's lagging behind. I mean, I understand that it's all for the next decade, but the cars are on sale now. The Leaf is out there, and so far it has yet to make much of a dent in Europe.
Okay, let's start out with Sergio Montero on both of those points. And then
Okay, thank you, Melinda. On the first questions, I think you are right. Marginal benefits are, of course, important, but for the time being, they are marginal. So they are not a central part of the equation. And let's not, even though they may be important in the future, and they need to be considered on the value proposal, we need to give them a relative importance on the weight that they have. And we should not forget that people are extremely smart when deciding how to invest their money on a vehicle. Meaning that, for instance, even though a diesel car is 10 to 15% more expensive in Portugal than gasoline, I think it's pretty much everywhere, at the end of the day, the diesel cars are sold at 80–85% versus 15% gasoline. This means that people accept to invest a little bit more because they will recoup that on the maintenance and the fuel cost. So people will make their own judgment on the best way. And I think why we don't have a higher penetration, this interacts with the first and the second question, is because of those cultural and perception barriers that we still have. First, perception, cost is a problem, especially cost associated with the value proposal. So cost, well, it costs pretty much the same for a far lower range. So I won't do it just now. We will consider it, and the number of studies show that people considering to purchase an electric vehicle is increasing, number, but actual purchases, even though increasing, not at the pace we were expected. So there are a number of things that need to change, and also, I think, communication. Communication is essential to make a perception, and communication is key on this area. The range, the cost, the points of connection, the central benefits and the marginal benefits are critical for them to be understood by the citizen so that when they make their investment decision, they will end up deciding on electric vehicle. But at the end of the day, car sharing and all other forms of sharing costs and services, at least on an initial proposal when the technology is not fully tested and the service is not fully perceived by the public, I think we should think as politicians and as industry leaders, we should think on that route as well.
thank you. Other comments from the panel? And yep, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, elaborating on what you just said and coming back to your figures, I think that at least my vision is that e-mobility doesn't simply refer to the full electric vehicles. I have a lot of admiration for Nissan and Renault, all these other companies who put full electric vehicles on the market because we will benefit from their experience. But I think that the field of hybrid vehicles, and in particular plug-in hybrids, is certainly going to help us actually bridge the gap between existing situation and a full electric situation. And I think that in this respect, we see new vehicles coming on the market. And once again, it's going to be interesting because coming back to the battery with the plug-in hybrid, depending on how many kilometers you want to make, you can get a battery with a reasonable cost. And the technology today of managing energy coming from the thermal engine, coming from the electric vehicle, is well under command. Okay, it's pretty seamless. So once again, I really see that we have all the ingredients to make sure that e-drive, or at least limited, okay, for a few kilometers, is going to make major inroads in the years to come.
Thank you. Yeah.
Again, could you go back to my slide?
Let's just leave those
Yeah, a
Nissan
lot of
slides
information there,
up here.
actually. We saw like, the 13,000 in Japan and the 11,000 in the US and the 4,000 in Europe. But this is like a really difference of like start of the sales timing. So Europe is probably growing, especially, I have to investigate more, but Norway, the Leaf is selling a lot. And because of the circumstances in Norway is really different from the other country maybe. And also the Japan, most of like the owner is like a city resident. They don't travel so long distance. Driving around like a house or maybe shopping and then not go far. And the US customer is really, this is a second car. Actually, they use this kind primarily, but this is a smaller, they usually have two cars. This is a smaller one. Larger one is a big, long distance SUV, whatever. That's a kind of very typical of the pattern. That's why we have this kind of difference. But I believe that Europe will catch up very, very quickly because of, as you described, the circumstances.
Pato Doherty, did you want to add something?
I suppose in relation to the first question, the gentleman from Denmark, I agree with you in terms of the two-way communication. Ultimately, two-way communication will only work and make sense where the vehicle battery is giving power back to the grid if the electricity companies make it financially worthwhile. If they don't, well, people will not, they prefer to leave the charge in their battery so their vehicle is available whenever they want. But in the first phase, one-way communication, as in charging from renewable energy, makes absolute sense, and you can accommodate much more wind and intermittent renewables on a power system with storage, and electric vehicles is probably the cheapest form of storage at this point in time. But as I said, going to the ultimate phase two-way will only work if the customer benefits financially. I suppose in relation to the second question and uptake in Europe, our experience is that, okay, there's a marketing job to be done in terms of convincing people that there's a paradigm shift in mobility, and that's all about the infrastructure and the driving experience. We have purchased a number of vehicles, including Nissan Leafs, and we give them out to our staff and to our managers, and they really love the driving experience once they drive them. So there's a marketing issue there, but ultimately it comes down to cost. In Ireland, Nissan recently took, the costs in Ireland were similar to what we're outlined here for Portugal, €35,000, 5,000 government grant, net cost of 30,000. Nissan took 5,000 off the cost of the Nissan Leaf in Ireland there recently, and sales have shot up. So ultimately it's, and I suppose as people are living in more and more austere times with austerity, cost does matter.
Okay, I have a question here, and then also here in the front. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Professor Giannopoulos from the National Institute of Transport of Greece. I have a question. Sorry, you didn't hear me.
Go ahead. We hear you. It's fine.
I had a question concerning standardization, because we haven't heard very much spoken about this. And my question is really, how important do you think standardization is in this issue, and how do you see it coming, top-down or bottom-up?
Thank you very much. I'm going to bundle a couple of questions. So you here, please, in the pink tie. Yeah.
My name is Jaap de Wit, Netherlands Institute for Transport Policy Analysis. My question is about introduction of smart grid technology. I observed some striking parallels between smart grid technology and road pricing schemes. For example, both are based on peak pricing, both require individual intelligent metering systems, strong focus on technological solutions, etc., etc. And you may be aware of the several attempts in the Netherlands for introducing road pricing schemes, and all of them failed. And the reason is the social acceptability of such kind of systems. So my question is, how about social acceptability of smart grid systems, taking into account some lessons of road pricing? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take those two, and I'm going to ask Mr. De Wit to give his microphone to the gentleman here in the, yes, exactly, who's had his hand patiently up, and we'll come back to you in a second. Okay. Let's take these two first. Who would like to comment on those? Mr. Yamashita, go ahead. Pat Doherty.
First one, the standardization is very important. Especially, we are now looking at the chargers standardization, especially quick charger. And there are 3 different types of the quick charger they are at this moment as a plan. And the one is a Nissan so-called Chademo. The one is the combo. And then China has their special one. So those are 3 the main different of and the chargers. But it's very difficult to combine these 3 together because they already started each study. Only Chademo Nissan's one is available in the market, but they said the others are coming very soon. So how we can kind of make this is one common solution? That's my headache at this moment. But anyway. Not only this one, some of the infrastructure. When we have a wireless charging system, for example, it's like microwave type of the charging system. When it comes to the market, we have to make it kind of a very standard type of one. Otherwise, the car makers has to make all kind of different the specs depending on the country. That's really kind of pity. So we have to make this kind of things. So there are a lot of the different type of standards. The requirement is coming as new technologies. That's a good point, but we are really fighting.
Question was also, of course, top-down or bottom-up.
This is all industry involved, and when I talk to the government side, they do not have so much of the big control of this kind of standardization. It's more like the industry, academy, many people are involved. So this system is another kind of headache for us. So it's a lot of things to do, but anyway.
Pat Doherty, you wanted to add something on those 2 points?
Yeah.
Including cautionary tale of road pricing schemes?
Yeah, I'll have a go at that one too. Standardization is absolutely essential, and it's really, really complex. There's everything from equipment, the simple plug that plugs at the vehicle end and into the charger end. And here in Europe, we're almost in danger of having different plugs in different countries. There's equipment, there's the specifications of equipment, and even down to some kind of a credit card fob that you'll have to swipe at a public charging post, and whether that's RFID technology or whatever it is, at the specification for that and the communications protocols. I don't think top-down is going to work. I think it has to be collaborative within industry, and that's going to take time. That's the journey we're going to travel. In relation to smart grids and pricing and I suppose the similarities between electricity networks and systems and transport systems and congestion and peak pricing and all of that. We did an experiment in Ireland, a smart metering experiment in Ireland, in a very, very controlled environment. We installed a large number of smart meters and did a smart metering trial over 12 months. And some interesting results have come out of it, that overall demand reduction has not reduced much, not sufficiently to justify smart metering, but what we did get was a significant shift, a 9% shift from peak to off-peak, and that's all about price. So again, it comes back to, it's difficult to shift consumer behaviour unless you make it absolutely cost effective for them. There's no point in me telling my daughter she cannot have her electric shower at peak electricity prices, because if she's going out tonight, she'll want to have her shower. But it really comes down to price, and shifting consumer behaviour and people behaviour is a slow and a difficult thing. It's kind of, I suppose, it's where psychology interacts with technology.
And is most effective for those who are actually paying the bills, not the daughters.
Absolutely.
Here we have a question, and we also have a question here. Go ahead here, please, and then we'll come back.
It's Neil Pawley from the Transport Research Laboratory in the UK. Several of you mentioned that the short-term view taken of cost and benefits by the users, both private users and appropriate commercial users, such as fleets and such like. And the longer-term view of costs and benefits that need to be taken by the suppliers of infrastructure and of the, indeed, of manufacturers. And many of you said that you need to get these together and they need to talk together and get the stakeholders, get the ducks in a row, if you like. That might be happening. I'm not sure it's obvious that it's happening. And I just wonder to what extent you think that's happening now. Everybody talks about the next 10 years. There's always the next 10 years. But we're going to get to the next few years very quickly. You know, we need to get these things sorted out now. What evidence is there that actually that's happening?
Very good, thank you. And then we'll take this one as well.
My name is Jerker Sjögren from Lindholmen Science Park in Sweden. It has been a very interesting discussion, and for me, what I have heard is that it's more a question of mental shift, the paradigm shift, than technological shift. So my question to you is, when we talk about what will happen next decade, what should be the key message to people in common? That this is the only way through difficulties, or this is a wonderful way to a new life next decade?
Those are two related questions in my view, and very good questions for a summing up round here on the podium. So let me start with Mr. Poupart-Lafarge, and then I'll take a comment from everybody on these two rather philosophical points. Go ahead. Beginning with, of course, the concrete point. When is that collaboration, when is that really going to start to happen, or is it happening?
No, that's a very good point, and as we are discussing psychological impact, it reminds me about a panel, a similar panel on smart grid with a producer of controllers. And the question is whether, if we think that the average consumer does not go as fast as we want in terms of changing his habits, do we want to change his habits regardless about his own will? And for your daughter, we can shut down the shower, or she will have a cold shower. and it seems far away, but actually the cursor is not so obvious. And you probably know, and I don't know if ESB is doing the same, but when there are peak consumption, you offload the grid. And you start to offload the average consumers, and your light is a little bit less light. So this kind of attitude does already exist. So what do we want to do as collaborative with a money incentive or a kind of general education incentive? And what do we want to do as compulsory, and how we want to channel through each individual the necessity to better manage its mobility and its power consumption. And it seems to be a philosophical question, but it is a very concrete question. And if you go now in smart building, I don't know if you have your headquarters in smart building, but if you have so, then if you want to change the temperature, it's becoming impossible. So you move from individual happiness to collective happiness quite in a narrow border.
Very interesting. Who would like to take the next stab at those two philosophical issues here? Go ahead.
Okay, I'll be glad to continue. And coming back to the question of why it would be during the next decade that things might change and how we can... I strongly believe in market forces. But to tell you my real conviction, I think that the change will come with three game changers, which have to happen in this decade. First game changer is an intergovernmental decision about the absolute necessity to reduce CO2 emissions by a factor of 2 by 2050. That will be the first game changer. The second game changer is that after the budget deficit crisis that a lot of our countries are suffering from, I bet that the next area of consideration from governments and countries will be trade deficits. and the importance of oil imports in trade deficits for a lot of our countries. And the third game changer is going to come from mayors of big cities who, thanks to the different experiments which are being conducted a little bit everywhere in the world, will come to realize that the best way to get reelected is to propose to their fellow citizens to establish zero-emission, zero-accident cities, but in particular zero-emission. Going electric, as Henri Poupard-Lafarge explained, we are already used to it with trams, metros, and trains, and so forth. These are, in my view, three game changers which have to come, which will come during this decade, because they will represent a major step forward for society at large. And once we integrate these three elements, it becomes obvious that we have somehow to turn electric. I'm not saying that we need to move away from oil. We need oil, okay? But at least we need to introduce this new revolution, and it will come. And then we'll be glad to have companies like Nissan or ESB or governments having taken the lead in conducting these experiments. So that's the reason why it will happen next decade. It will be massive, and I really hope that those three game changers will take place in the next coming few years.
Sergio Montero, can I ask you for the next comment? I see you nodding your head vigorously.
Yeah, I fully agree with this view that it has to be a mentality continuation issue. See how we behaved as a world regarding environmental issues like 10 or 15 or maybe 20 years ago. The perception was far lower than the one we have right now. It's our daughters that ask us to recycle. It's the other way around, because they learn about that in schools. When I'm not that old, and when I was in school, recycling was not part of the program. So this means that the approach is to show the long-term benefits and to explain the short-term cost, or at least the cost of opportunity to have this sort of approach. And coming to big cities and the importance of politicians have their goals aligned as well, let's think about the impact in big cities of stopping traffic in big centers and using metro or train or whatever. It has a direct impact in terms of CO2 emissions, which has a positive impact in terms of the image of the city, the country, which has a positive impact in terms of tourism, and you open cafes, and you open a number of small businesses that generate employment. So this is the overall approach, and that's the reason why this is not a power or a transport, or it's an economic issue that needs to be viewed at an economic level, at a global level, and with an integrated perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Yamashita, would you like to?
The 10 years is the really kind of massive, long period of time. When we look back at the 10 years ago, probably we may have a very few hybrid vehicle. We don't have such a kind of a vehicle in plan at all. And but many things happen in 10 years. But next 10 years, probably much faster, or more dramatic, like the change may occur. So it's very difficult to predict. But who is a game changer? That's probably we, people here, manufacturer, local government, or some of the academy. If they believe this may happen, then these are like a game changer. So when I say this vehicle price may become half, or the battery capacity may become double, or distance or range become double, who will make this? We. So that's my belief. So we have to lead this kind of a change. Otherwise, nobody can change. That's our company's belief. Maybe wrong, but actually, this belief is really important for us. That's my thought.
Thank you very much. Pat O'Doherty, you get to have the last word.
On the issue of collaboration, can you hear me?
I think so. Go on.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
on the issue of collaboration, yes, it's happening. I believe it is happening, and it will increase. It's happening, and research institutes and all of the kind of standards organisations and collaborative organisations across Europe are actually driving this. I suppose ultimately, for me, it's about a vision. In response to the question at the end there, it's about creating a vision of a different future. And the words that we use across the panel here were about a cleaner world, a cleaner planet, an environmentally more responsible world, and environmentally more responsible citizens. And I believe the future's in good hands with our children. I agree completely. They are more environmentally aware, and the world is turning smart. So the issue really is around leadership at all levels, leadership at industry and leadership politically, and then coming together in a collaborative way for a shared vision, not just for a country or for a continent, but for a planet. And I suppose if I have the last word, I'd say I believe the future is electric, but then I would say that.
One has to worry, are our children even going to be driving? I have 2 children, 20 and 22. Neither one has seen it necessary to get a driver's license. Shocking for Americans of my generation. Many, many thanks to all of you for that very, very interesting discussion. Lots of food for thought there. And many thanks to you in the audience for your attention and for your contributions. Great questions from all of you as well. And very warm thanks to the organizers for putting together this very rich panel. So I'd like to wish everybody guten Appetit, because it's time for lunch. And many thanks again to all of you.